young people globally who want to be like Elon Musk? What's your advice to them?
I think that probably they shouldn't want to be.
You?
I think it sounds better than it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not as much fun being me as you'd think. I don't know.
You don't think so?
No. There's definitely, it could be worse for sure, but it's, I'm not sure I'm not sure I want to be me.
Okay.
But if, I think advice, if you want to make progress in things, I think that the best analytical framework for understanding the future is physics. I'd recommend studying the thinking process around physics, like not the equations. The equations certainly they're helpful, but the way of thinking in physics is it's the best framework for understanding things that are counterintuitive. And always taking the position that you are to some degree wrong, and your goal is to be less wrong over time. I think one of the biggest mistakes people generally make, and I'm guilty of it too, is wishful thinking. Like you want something to be true, even if it isn't true. And so you ignore the things that, you ignore the real truth because of what you want to be true. This is a very difficult trap to avoid. And like I said, it's certainly one that I find myself in having problems with. But if you just take that approach of you're always to some degree wrong, and your goal is to be less wrong, and solicit critical feedback, particularly from friends. Like particularly friends, if somebody loves you, they want the best for you. They don't want to tell you the bad things. So you have to ask them, and say, really, I really do want to know. and then they'll tell you. You don't need college to learn stuff, okay? Everything is available basically for free. You can learn anything you want for free. It is not a question of learning. There is a value that colleges have, which is like, seeing whether can somebody work hard at something, including a bunch of sort of annoying homework assignments, and still do their homework assignments, and kind of soldier through and get it done. That's like the main value of college. And then also, if you probably want to hang around with a bunch of people your own age for a while instead of going right into the workforce. So I think colleges are basically for fun and to prove you can do your chores, but they're not for learning. I think failure is bad. I don't think it's good. But if something's important enough, then you do it even though the risk of failure is high. And so I think my advice, if somebody wants to start a company, is they should bear in mind that the most likely outcome is that it's not going to work. And they should reconcile themselves to that strong possibility. And they should only do it if they feel that they are really compelled to do it. Right. Because it's going to, the way starting a company works is like, usually in the very beginning it's kind of fun, and then it's really hellish for a number of years.
You talked about chewing glass.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine who's a successful entrepreneur, and started actually his career around the same time as I did, and he has a good phrase. His name's Bill Lee. He said, "Yeah, starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss." And
you agree with that?
Generally true. Yeah. And if you don't eat the glass, you're not going to be successful. There are just times when something is important enough, you believe in it enough, that you do it in spite of the fear. When you want to do something new, you have to apply the physics approach. Well, we have a lot of good people at SpaceX, that a lot of really talented people. In fact, I wonder, like, sometimes how we can make use of their talents in the best way, because I think we're often not using their talents in the best way. Yeah, but to the point of the question that was just asked, I want to make sure Tesla recruiting does not have anything that says requires university, because that's absurd. But there is a requirement of evidence of exceptional ability. Like, you just can't, if you're trying to do something exceptional, you must have evidence of exceptional ability. I don't consider going to college evidence of exceptional ability. In fact, ideally, you dropped out and did something. I mean, obviously, look at Gates is a pretty smart guy, he dropped out. Jobs is pretty smart, he dropped out. Larry Ellison, smart guy, he dropped out. Like, obviously not needed.
So,
did Shakespeare even go to college? Probably not.
but one of the fun things for me is watching the cargo go into the crew vessel. All of a sudden we had Dragon 1, now we have Crew Dragon, and it's substantially different but familiar. Mm-hmm. So tell us, what's been some of the hardest parts to transition from cargo into crew? Because crew is a little more important than cargo.
Yes, I mean, cargo can be replaced, crew cannot. And so the level of scrutiny, the level of attention is, I don't know, order of magnitude greater. I mean, it was already high for cargo. I mean, but it's just a whole nother level for crew. So, I told the SpaceX team that this mission reliability is not merely the top priority; it is the only priority right now. Mm-hmm. So we're just doing continuous engineering reviews from now, nonstop, 24 hours a day until launch. Just going over everything again and again and again. And I was out at the pad just recently, just walking down the rocket. We've got a team that's just crawling over the rocket in the horizontal. Then we're going to rotate it vertical. Then we're going to crawl over in the vertical. And we're just looking for any possible action that can improve the probability of success, no matter how small. Whether that comes from an intern or me or anyone, doesn't matter.
What sort of things do you look for in people or in processes that make the workforce better?
Sure. Well, I think the massive thing that can be done is to make sure your incentive structure is such that innovation is rewarded and lack of innovation is punished. So you got to be a carrot and a stick. So if somebody is innovating and making good progress, then they should be promoted sooner. And if somebody is completely failing to innovate, not every role requires innovation, but if they're in a role where innovation should be happening and it's not happening, then they should either not be promoted or exited. And let me tell you, you'll get promoted, you'll get innovation real fast. So now your actual total mass of a steel, of a reusable steel spacecraft is less than that of the most advanced carbon fiber vehicle you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. Wow.
But this happened by accident, by the way. This may sound like some great insight, but it actually happened because we were moving too slowly on composite. And I was like, we cannot move this slowly or we'll go bankrupt. So just do this with steel.
So the design has to be focused on problem solving, otherwise you're going to spend too much time trying to figure. You don't start with
Yeah, I'm like sort of taking to management by rhyming. If the schedule is long, your design is wrong.
Right.
This is very true.
That's good point.
Yes. Advice I'd give to people starting companies, to entrepreneurs in general, is really focus on making a product that your customers love. It's so rare that you can buy a product and you love the product when you bought it. There are very few things that fit into that category. And if you can come up with something like that, your business will be successful for sure. Tesla really faced a severe threat of death due to the Model 3 production ramp. Essentially, the company was bleeding money like crazy, and just if we didn't solve these problems in a very short period of time, we would die. And it was extremely difficult to solve them.
How close to death did you come?
Within single-digit weeks.
22 hours a day, or how many
I
hours?
was working, so 7 days a week, sleeping in the factory. I worked in the paint shop, general assembly, body shop.
You ever worry about yourself imploding? Like it's just too much?
Absolutely. No one should put this many hours into work. This is not good. And people should not work this hard. They should not do this. It's very painful.
Painful in what sense?
It hurts my brain and my heart. It hurts. This is not recommended for anyone. I just did it because if I didn't do it, then good chance Tesla would die. But the real way I think you actually achieve intellectual property protection is by innovating fast enough. If your rate of innovation is high, then you don't need to worry about protecting the IP because other companies will be copying something that you did years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, just make sure your rate of innovation is fast. Speed of innovation is what matters. And I do say this to my teams quite a lot, that innovation per unit time, as I go innovation per year, if you want to say it, is what matters, not innovation absent time. Because if you wanted to make, say, 100% improvement in something, and that took 100 years or 1 year, that's radically different. So it's like, what is your rate of innovation? That matters. And is the rate of innovation, is that accelerating or decelerating? And a weird thing happens when companies get big is that most companies or organizations, the bigger they get, they tend to get less innovative. Not just less innovative on a per person basis, but less innovative in the absolute. And I think this is probably because the incentive structure is not there for innovation. It's not enough to use words to encourage innovation. The incentive structure must be aligned with that. That's fundamental.
You need to work, depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hot up we had just one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night, 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, say okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company.
I think of these things as just there's a certain amount of time, and within that time you want the best net outcome. So for all the set of actions that you can do, there's going to be some of which will fail, some of which will succeed, and you want the net useful output of your set of actions to be the highest. I'm going to use a baseball analogy. Baseball, they don't let you just sit there and wait for the perfect pitch until you get a real easy one. They can give you 3 shots, and the third one, they say, okay, and they get off and they go back to put somebody else up there. So your 3 strikes on baseball, not on bat anymore. So what you're really looking for is what's the batting average? How you doing on score, and just there's going to be some amount of failure, but you want your net output, net useful output to be maximized. Failure is essentially irrelevant unless it is catastrophic.
Don't just follow the trend. So you may have heard me say that it's good to think in terms of the physics approach of first principles, which is rather than reasoning by analogy, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths you can imagine, and you reason up from there. And this is a good way to figure out if something really makes sense or if it's just what everybody else is doing. It's hard to think that way. You can't think that way about everything. It takes a lot of effort. But if you're trying to do something new, it's the best way to think. And that framework was developed by physicists to figure out counterintuitive things like quantum mechanics. So it's really a powerful method.
We need to push for radical breakthroughs. And if you don't push for radical breakthroughs, you're not going to get radical outcomes. And that does mean taking risks. And common sense that if you take a big risk, in order to have a big reward, there must be a big risk. Most of the time, you cannot find big reward for small risk. Those are rare. So you're going to have some proportionality with the risk and reward. Simplify your product as much as possible. And then like if I think of some of the ways in which, how does a smart engineer make dumb mistakes, is optimize something that shouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. Don't optimize something that shouldn't exist. But people are trained to do this in college. You can't say no to the professor. The professor's going to give you the exam and you've got to answer all the questions, or they will get angry. And give you a bad grade. So then you always optimize you always answer the question. A lot of the times you should say this is the wrong question.
Right.
In fact, the question is definitely wrong to some degree, just how wrong. And I think just generally taking the approach that your design is some degree wrong, probably a lot more than you think. Your goal is to make it less wrong over time. Zip2 started off as basically, like I said, we're trying to figure out how to make enough money to exist as a company, and so since there wasn't really any advertising money being made, we thought we could help existing companies get online, bring their stuff online. So we developed software that helped bring a lot of the newspapers and media companies online, because a lot of them just they also didn't know what the internet was.
You had some big customers, didn't you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And even the ones that were aware of the internet didn't have a software team, so they weren't very good at developing functionality. So we had, as investors and customers, the New York Times Company, Knight Ridder, Hearst, and so we were able to get them to pay us to develop software for them to bring them online, so online publishing stuff. And we did maps and directions and yellow pages and white pages and various other things. 2008 in particular was awful because we had the third launch failure in a row of our Falcon 1 vehicle at SpaceX. The Tesla financing round that we were raising fell apart because the economy was going to tailspin. And it's pretty hard to raise money for a startup car company, late 2008 when GM and Chrysler are busy going bankrupt. Mm-hmm. That was tough. And then Solar City had to deal with Morgan Stanley, and Morgan Stanley had to renege on the deal because they themselves were running out of money. So it looked like all three companies were going to die. Mm-hmm. And I was also going through a divorce. So that was definitely a low point.
So it's 2008, you're going through a divorce, which like some, to borrow your word, douchebag vloggers are writing about to make even worse. Right,
Yes, that's true. In addition to all that stuff happening, I was getting dumped on massively in the press.
Right.
Yeah.
It looks like all three companies are going to fail. I mean, why do you keep going with all three? Like, I feel like even a lot of great entrepreneurs in that situation would have been like, I've already sunk everything I have in these companies, and I got to pick one. But you didn't. I mean, you kept doing all three. Why?
That was a very tough call. At the end of 2008, that was probably one of the toughest calls I've had to make, because I could either reserve capital for one company or the other. I mean, unfortunately, Solar City didn't need a ton of capital, so they were okay. But between SpaceX and Tesla, it's sort of like if you've got two kids, and what do? Do you spend all your money to maximize the probability of success of one, or do you try to keep both alive? Fortunately, it worked.
How, aside from making great products, how do you get people excited about Tesla? There's a lot of people I know and that I talk to who are just intrigued and interested and excited about Tesla as a company.
The thing I really focus on at Tesla is like really put all the money into and attention into trying to make the product as compelling as possible. So, because I think that the way to sell any product is through word of mouth. So if somebody gets the car, they really like it, and actually the key is like to have a product that people will love. Yeah. And generally people, if they're at a party or talking to friends or whatever, you'll talk about the things that you love. But if you just like something, it's okay. You're not going to care that much. But if you
get
love
the reactions from the highs and the lows, so you got to make sure people really love it.
You're going to talk, and then that'll generate word of mouth. And that's basically how our sales have grown. Like we don't spend any money on advertising or endorsements so anyone like buys our car, they just bought it because they like the car.
Zip2 happened. You sold it and.
And bought the McLaren, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, you invested most of that money into your next venture, X.com.
That's right. Most of the funds went into X.com, which was later renamed PayPal. That worked out pretty well.
It worked out pretty well, but looking back on it, because you put a lot of your eggs in that basket. Would you advise entrepreneurs to roll the bones quite the way you did?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think it's worth investing your own capital in what you do. I don't believe in the sort of other people's money thing. I think if you're not willing to put your own assets at stake, then you shouldn't ask other people to do that.
We don't think too much about what competitors are doing.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's important to be just focused on making the best possible products. It's sort of maybe analogous to what they say about if you're in a race. Yeah. Don't worry about what the other runners are doing. Yeah. Just run.
What is the likelihood that you personally will go to Mars?
70%. We've recently made a number of breakthroughs that I'm just really fired up about.
And when does that happen? In our lifetimes?
Yeah. I'm talking about moving there. So it's like if you get the price per ticket maybe around $200,000.
This could be an escape hatch for rich people.
No, your probability of dying on Mars is much higher than Earth. Really, the ad for going to Mars would be like Shackleton's ad for going to the Antarctic. It's going to be hard. There's a good chance of death. Going in a little can through deep space. You might land successfully. Once you land successfully, there will be you'll be working nonstop to build the base. So not much time for leisure. And once you get there, even after doing all this, there's a very harsh environment, so there's a good chance you die there. We think you can come back, but we're not sure. Now, does that sound like an escape hatch for rich people?
And yet you would unhesitatingly go.
There's lots of people that climb mountains. Why do they climb mountains? Because people die on Mount Everest all the time. They like doing it for the challenge. It's very important to seek out, to actively seek out and listen very carefully to negative feedback. And this is something that people tend to avoid because it's painful. Yeah. But I think this is a very common mistake, is to not actively seek out and listen to negative feedback.
Where do you do that? Do you go into forums? Do you go into Twitter? Like, what are your areas where you go to look for feedback on, let's say, the Tesla?
Well, it's like everyone I talk to is, in fact, when friends get a product, I say, look, don't tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like.
Right.
And because otherwise your friend is not going to tell you what he doesn't like.
Right.
He's going to say, oh, I love this and that, and then leave out the this is the stuff I don't like list. Mm-hmm. Because he wants to be your friend, it doesn't want to offend you. So you really need to sort of coax negative feedback, and you know that if somebody is your friend, or at least not your enemy, and they're giving you negative feedback, then they may be wrong, but it's coming from a good place. And sometimes even your enemies give you good negative feedback. When I started the first internet company, Zip2, with my brother and another person, Greg Curry, it wasn't really with the thought of being wealthy. I've got nothing against being wealthy, but
we'll get back to that later too.
but it was just from the standpoint of wanting to be part of the internet, and I figured if we could make enough money to just get by, that would be okay. And when we started off, we literally only had like one computer, and so it would be our web server during the day, and I'd code at night. And we just got a small office in Palo Alto back when rent was not insane, and it cost us like $450 a month. It was cheaper than an apartment, so we actually just slept in the office and then showered at the YMCA on Page Mill, El Camino. So we'd walk over there and shower, and that was actually, I think that was when I first met you, by the way. So I don't know how many people, probably not many people know this, but we actually pitched Steve in like January '96 on the Zip2 business plan, and actually I thought Steve was actually one of the most up to speed on what actually was in our business plan. Most of the people we met did not actually read our business plan. In fact, a lot of venture capitalists we met at the time didn't even know what the internet was. They'd never used it. They didn't think it would amount to anything.
We still do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm talking like sort of well-known people on Sand Hill. I was like, wow, okay. But at the time, nobody had made any money on the internet, so I guess that's then it wasn't really clear evidence that there was a business. I mean, I should say that, when I was a kid, I didn't really have any grand designs. I mean, the reason I started programming computers is because I like computer games. And I play lots of computer games, and I learned that if I wrote software and sold it, then I could get more money and buy better computers. So it wasn't really, with some grand vision or anything. When I was growing up, I'd read lots of books, and they were very often set in the United States, and it seemed like a lot of new technology was being developed in the United States. So I thought, okay, I really want to work on new technology, so I want to get to Silicon Valley. Which when I was growing up, Silicon Valley seemed like some sort of mythical place, like Mount Olympus or something. I came to the conclusion that my initial premise was wrong, that in fact there's a great deal of will. There's not such a shortage, but people don't think there's a way, and that if people thought there was a way, or at least something that wouldn't break the federal budget, then people would support it. Which, in retrospect, I think is actually kind of obvious, because the United States is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. People came here from other places. I mean, it's there's no nation that's more a nation of explorers than the United States, but people need to believe that it's possible, and that it's not, they don't have to give up like healthcare or something important.
Right.
It's got to be that's important. So I thought, okay, well, then it's not a question of will. It's a question of showing that there's a way. In the beginning, nobody wanted a Tesla. I can tell you that. When we made the original sort of roadster sports car, people were like, well, why would I want an electric car? My gasoline car works fine. I'm like, no, electric car is better. I should try it. And it was hard to get people to do a test drive. First, nobody knew who we were. They never heard of this company. And I'm like, yeah, we're named after Nikola Tesla. You know that guy? Nope. So for sure we were doing push in the beginning, because people said there was no one telling us that they wanted an electric car. So it was not out of like, it was like lots of people coming up to me saying, hey, I really want an electric car. I heard that 0 times. So people were like, it's like, man, we better make an electric car and show that these things can be good, and then people will want them. It's like, I think it was like Henry Ford said, like we talk about the Model T, it's like if you ask the public what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. So if you did like a big survey and say, well, hey, public, before automobiles, what would you like? It's like, well, I'd like my horse to go 3 miles an hour faster and eat less food and be stronger and live longer and that kind of thing. There'll be basically a bunch of incremental improvements on a horse. Because people, when you say like, well, what about an automobile, that car that drives itself? Like, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy. But when you actually make an automobile and give it to people and say, okay, now this is a horse where you can keep it in the barn, and if you leave for a month, it's still alive. Yeah. So carry more weight than a horse and go further and that kind of thing. So, anyway, it's like when it's a radically new product, people don't know that they want it because it's just not in their scope. I think when they first started making TVs, they did a nationwide survey. I think this might have been like 46 or 48. It was like a famous nationwide survey. Will you ever buy a TV? And it was like 96% of respondents said no. Some crazy number. Like basically everyone's like, would you buy a TV? And maybe they put a price in there or something, I don't know. But it was famously, almost everyone said they would not buy a TV, but they didn't know what they're talking about.
So the big game-changing stuff at the beginning is a company push kind of a thing most of the time, but then changes to the product over time can be a lot more customer pull kind of a focus.
Yeah, changes to the product over time can be incremental changes. Then customers can certainly tell you, it's good to get customer feedback to say, how can we improve the product? And once they're using it, they can say, okay, I like this thing about it, I don't like this other thing, and then we can improve the product over time. Customer feedback after they have the fundamental thing is great. When trying different things, you got to have some acceptance of failure, as you were alluding to earlier. Failure must be an option. If failure is not an option, it's going to result in extremely conservative choices, and you may get something even worse than lack of innovation. Things may go backwards. If what you really want is you want reward and punishment to be proportionate to the actions that you seek. So if what you're seeking is innovation, then you should reward success in innovation, and only there should be minor consequences for trying and failing. There should be minor. With significant rewards for trying and succeeding, minor consequences for trying and not succeeding, and major negative consequences for not trying.
Maybe I just blank out the word doubt. No, I mean, to be totally frank, I doubted us too. So I thought we, had maybe, when starting SpaceX, maybe had a 10% chance of reaching orbit. So to those who doubted us, I was like, well, I think you're probably right. I mean, the number of times that I was told, like, because I was taking the money that I earned from PayPal and rolling it into to create SpaceX and Tesla, and I ended up spending it all. It wasn't the intention, but almost both companies went bankrupt. Frankly, 2008 was a tough year. It took us 4 attempts just to get to orbit with Falcon 1. But a lot of times people would tell me this joke, like, how do you make a small fortune in the rocket industry? You start with a large one is the punchline. And I was like, okay, I already heard that joke 12,000 times. Anyway, and it almost came true. We just barely made it there. That 4th launch of Falcon 1, that's all the money we had for that 4th launch. And then, and that wasn't even enough to save the company. We also then had to win the NASA cargo resupply contract. So that came a little after, a little bit later, or right towards the end of 2008. Those are the two key things that saved SpaceX. Otherwise, we would have, not made it. So yeah, I think those doubters were, their probability assessment was correct. But fortunately, Beta smiled upon us and brought us to this day.
As you look back on your career in the space industry, what has been the most surprising or unexpected challenge that you faced? And along those lines, if you were to go back in time and talk to your 20-year-old self, would you do anything differently?
Go back in time to your 20-year-old self.
I mean, I think I think it would make far fewer mistakes. Obviously, if I could go, like, here's a list of all the dumb things you're about to do. Please do not do them.
Wouldn't we all?
It'd be a very long list, and like, here, let me write it down or something. I mean, it's hindsight's 20/20, so it's hard to say. I mean, I've made so many foolish mistakes. I lost count, honestly. I mean, some of these things I just wish like that's simple sort of mantra, management by rhyming. I mean, it worked for Homer, okay? But management by rhyming is that thing I was saying, like, if the schedule is long, the design is wrong. We've overcomplicated the design many times. And I think we should have just gone with a simpler design, with the acid test being, how long will it take for this to fly? And if it's going to take a long time, don't do it. Do something else.
I think one thing that's important is if you have a choice of a lower valuation with someone you really like, or a higher valuation with someone you have a question mark about, take the lower valuation. It's better to have a higher quality venture capitalist who you think would be great to work with than to get a higher valuation with someone where there's even a question mark, really. I think that's important. It's sort of like getting married. I mean, the way I tend to view problems is from a physics standpoint. I think physics is a good analytical framework. And one of the key things in physics is to reason from first principles. This is contrary to the way most human reasoning takes place, which is by analogy. Reasoning from first principles just means that you figure out what are the fundamental truths or things that people are pretty sure are fundamental truths, and can you build up to a conclusion from that, from those principles, and then certainly if you come up with some idea and it appears to violate one of those fundamental truths, then you're probably wrong, or you should get a really big prize or something like that. So this may seem like, I don't know, it may seem sort of obvious when it's explained, but it's actually not what people do. Reasoning by analogies is helpful because it's a shortcut.
Yeah.
And it's mostly correct, but it tends to be most incorrect when you're dealing with new things, because it's hard to analogize to something really new.
Tesla really faced a severe threat of death due to the Model 3 production ramp. Essentially, the company was bleeding money like crazy, and just if we didn't solve these problems in a very short period of time, we would die. And it was extremely difficult to solve them.
How close to death did you come?
Within single-digit weeks.
22 hours a day, or like how many hours?
I was working, so 7 days a week, sleeping in the factory. I worked I worked in the paint shop, general assembly, body shop.
Do you ever worry about yourself imploding? Like it's just too much?
Absolutely. No one should put this many hours into work. This is not good. And people should not work this hard. They should not do this. It's very painful.
Painful in what sense?
It hurts my brain and my heart.
And you started with a much smaller rocket, a Falcon 1. And was your goal at that point, when you started with Falcon 1, to get to the point where we had 9 engines for Falcon 9? Was that your goal at that time?
When I started SpaceX, I only thought there was maybe a 10% chance of getting Falcon 1 to orbit. I did not at all think that this would happen. So this is for sure a dream come true. But I literally at the time I didn't know anything about rockets, and I was, I've been the chief engineer of SpaceX since day one, and I don't really know anything about rockets, which is why the first 3 rockets failed.
Right.
And then
so the first 3 Falcon 1s for SpaceX were failures.
Yes.
And then tell me about the fourth one.
The fourth one, so I'd actually only had enough money for three flights. So I had no more money left, but we managed the team sort of rallied, and we managed to put together enough spare parts to do a 4th launch, and that 4th launch was successful. And then
So what would have happened if it wasn't successful?
Oh, well, SpaceX would have died.
So we would not be here right now, at this moment, getting ready to launch Crew Dragon to the International System.
We've got a lot of work to do because we've got a lot of service centers and charge stations to construct. So mostly it's like we're trying to build our service and charge infrastructure as fast as possible. And I know this, like some of the customers who have ordered a car, they're not in the major cities, so they're a little unhappy with us because we are delaying delivery of their car. And in fact, I'm going to apologize to some of them personally and explain the reason we are delaying delivery is because we really want them to have a good experience. But if they're too far from a service center and the charging is not sorted out, then they will not have a good experience. So we're going to delay the cars just for a few months to make sure that they have a good experience.
I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing.
Me Too type ideas.
Yeah, it's slight iterations on a theme, and it's kind of mentally easier to reason by analogy rather than from first principles. But by first principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world, and what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true, and then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy.
Give me an example of that. Like, what's one thing that you've done that on that you feel has worked for you?
Sure. So somebody could say, in fact people do, that battery packs are really expensive and that's just the way they'll always be because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb, because if you applied that reasoning to anything new, then you wouldn't be able to ever get to that new thing.
Right.
You are unusually fearless and willing to go in the face of other people telling you something is crazy. And I know a lot of pretty crazy people, you still stand out. Where does that come from, or how do you think about making a decision when everyone tells you this is a crazy idea? Or where do you get the internal strength to do that?
Well, first of all, I'd say I actually think I feel fear quite strongly. So it's not as though I just have the absence of fear. I feel it quite strongly. But there are just times when something is important enough, you believe in it enough that you do it in spite of the fear.
So speaking of important things,
like people shouldn't think people shouldn't think, well, I feel fear about this and therefore I shouldn't do it. It's normal to feel fear. Like you'd have to do something mentally wrong if you didn't feel fear.
So you just feel it and let the importance of it drive you to do it anyway.
Yeah, actually something that can be helpful is fatalism to some degree. If you just accept the probabilities, then that diminishes fear. When starting SpaceX, I thought the odds of success were less than 10%. And I just accepted that actually probably I would just lose everything. But that maybe would make some progress. If we could just move the ball forward, even if we died, maybe some other company could pick up the baton and keep moving it forward, so that would still do some good.
Yeah, same with Tesla. I thought the odds of a car company succeeding were extremely low.
This is widely regarded as one of the most robotics-driven auto assembly lines on the planet.
Elon, part of the thing I heard about the Model 3 is that there's too many robots. That maybe
Yeah, I agree.
You think so too? That maybe you need more people in here working.
We do.
In some cases, the robots actually slowed the production, right?
Yes, they did. We had this crazy complex network of conveyor belts, and it was not working. So we got rid of that whole thing.
This is cool, Elon.
Yeah.
Realizing it needed an overhaul, Musk personally took over the Model 3 production line at the beginning of April.
They're aiming for really extreme levels of precision, more than any other vehicle in the world.
He says he has resorted to pulling all-nighters at the plant.
When things get really intense, I don't have time to go home and shower and change, so I just sleep here.
I want to see. Where is that?
Oh, yeah, so
I
in this
wanna see.
conference room. I mean, it's pretty boring overall, really.
It's actually cold in here too.
Yeah, I like it cold.
So you like it cold?
I sleep on the couch over there.
So you're just laying here on the couch?
Yeah. Last time I was here, I actually slept literally on the floor because the couch was too narrow.
Yeah, I was going to say. And Elon, I have to say, it's not even a comfortable couch either.
No, it's terrible. This is not a good couch.
Musk feels like all the overtime is paying off, and now he says the Model 3 line is back on track.
And we're able to unlock some of the critical things that were holding us back from reaching 2,000 cars a week. But since then, we've continued to do 2,000 cars a week.
Do you think that this is sustainable? This pace is sustainable?
Yeah.
I remember when you first told me that you were thinking about tunnels.
When did I first tell you about that?
Years ago.
Okay, it's like a long time ago.
Yeah,
like
I thought you were joking.
Yeah, it was. I was joking, but it's not because of some epiphany that I had one day driving down the 405. That's how it gets translated somehow. I was talking about tunnels for years and years. For probably 5 years or 4 years at least, whenever I'd give a talk and people would ask me about what opportunities do you see in the world, I'd say tunnels. Can someone please build tunnels? So after 4 or 5 years of begging people to build tunnels, and still no tunnels, I was like, okay, I want to build a tunnel. So like maybe I'm missing something here. So I was like basically talking people's ears off of tunnels for several years, and then said, well, let's find out what it takes to build a tunnel. And so I started digging a tunnel. I wanted to start the tunnel from where I could see it from my office at SpaceX. So I said, well, let's just carve off a part of the parking lot across the road so I can see if anything's happening or not. And then we named our first boring machine Godot, because I kept waiting for it. It never came. Finally it did. And we got it going. And now we're making good progress.
I really need to give some thought to how can I provide advice that would be most helpful, and I'm not sure I've given enough thought to that to give you the best possible answer. But I think certainly being focused on something that you're confident will have high value to someone else, and just being really rigorous in making that assessment, because people tend to, a natural human tendency is wishful thinking. So a challenge for entrepreneurs is to say, well, what's the difference between really believing in your ideals and sticking to them versus pursuing some unrealistic dream that doesn't actually have merit? And that is a really difficult thing to tell. Can you tell the difference between those two things?
Right.
You know? So you need to be sort of very rigorous in your self-analysis. I think certainly extremely tenacious, and then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100 hour weeks every week.
Gosh.
And then
a lot of work.
All those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve.
Is the secret to your success to be the CEO of two companies at the same time?
No.
I think it's...
Because look at the correlation.
Yeah.
Struggling companies, everything's in the craft can in December 2008, so let's take on a new CEO gig. And, and same for Steve, coming back to Apple.
No, definitely it was not my intention to be CEO of two companies. There were certain things that I kind of wanted to, I thought were important to happen, and I thought it was important that that an electric vehicle happened, that there was a success in the electric vehicle arena, because the incumbent companies were convinced that it was not possible to create an electric car that looked good, had a good range performance and so forth, and that even if you did make such a car, it would not sell, because people had this love of gasoline. So we had to show that it was possible to create a compelling electric car, long range, good looking, all those things. That was a Tesla Roadster. I certainly was I was very, very bookish. I was reading all the time. So I was either reading, working on my computer, reading comics, playing Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing.
And I understand Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that wonderful book by Douglas Adams. That was a key book for you. What was it about that book that fired your imagination?
I guess when I was in around 12 or 13, I had a company, Existential Crisis, and I was reading various books on trying to figure out the meaning of life and, what does it all mean? Because it starts seeming quite meaningless, and then we happen to have some books by Nietzsche and Schopenhauer in the house, which you should not read at age 14. It's bad. It's really negative. But then I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was quite positive, I think, and it sort of highlighted an important point, which is that a lot of times the question is harder than the answer, and if you can properly phrase the question, then the answer is the easy part. And so, to the degree that we can better understand the universe, then we better know what questions to ask, and then whatever the question is that most approximates what's the meaning of life, that's the question we could ultimately get closer to understanding. And so I thought, well, to the degree that we can expand the scope and scale of consciousness and knowledge, human knowledge, then that would be a good thing.
Question that has been discussed over the past couple of days. Should we be considering one-way only trips to Mars? What's the best approach to colonize the planet? Is it, what's your view? Is that socially acceptable? Do you think people will sign up to do it?
I think there's plenty of people that would sign up for a one-way trip to Mars.
Maybe if we could have a show of hands, who would consider such an option? I see some, not many, but perhaps enough for a couple of missions.
So certainly be enough. I think it's sort of is it a one-way mission and then you die, or is it a one-way mission and you get resupplied? That's a big difference.
Wait for the second option.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it ends up being a moot point because you want to bring the spaceship back. These spaceships are expensive, okay? They're hard to build. You can't just leave them there. So whether or not people want to come back or not is kind of they can jump on if they want, but they need the spaceship back.
Thank you.
It's kind of weird. There's a huge collection of spaceships on Mars over time. It was maybe we should send them back. Of course we should send them back.
One of the most difficult choices I've ever faced in life was in 2008, I think I had maybe $30 million left, or $30 or $40 million left in 2008, and I had two choices. I could put it all into one company, and then the other company would definitely die, or split it between the two companies. But if I split it between the two companies, then both might die. When you put your blood, sweat, and tears into creating something, or building something, it's like a child. And so it's which one am I going to let one starve to death, couldn't bring myself to do it. So I split the money between the two. Fortunately, thank goodness, they both came through.
I've heard people say, listen, he's an out-of-the-box thinker, he's a businessman, he's an entrepreneur, but people that know you
Really a
say...
businessman, I wouldn't say.
You would say?
I'm not really a businessman.
You're not a businessman?
Not really.
No?
No.
What are you?
I'm sure there's probably lots of analysts on Wall Street who would agree that I'm not a businessman.
Okay, well, what do you think you are?
I'm an engineer.
An engineer?
Yeah.
Is it your dream to conquer the world and make the world a better place? What is your dream?
Like, technology is like magic, you know? I think like technology is the closest thing to magic that we have in the real world. And so I think like creative engineering is essentially technology development. I guess maybe when I was a kid, like Lord of the Rings is my favorite book.
Is it?
Yeah, and I thought it'd be like, what's the closest thing to being a wizard in the real world? And that's like creating new technologies.
What was your biggest failure, and how did it change you?
Wow, I have to really think hard about that. Failure. Never heard of it.
There's your answer.
Well, there's a ton of failures along the way, that's for sure. As I said, for SpaceX, the first 3 launches failed. And we actually were just barely able to scrape together enough parts and money to do the 4th launch. If that 4th launch had failed, we would have been dead. So multiple failures along the way. I tried very hard to get the right expertise in for SpaceX. I tried hard to find a great chief engineer for the rocket, but the good chief engineers wouldn't join, and the bad ones, well, there was no point in hiring them. So I ended up being chief engineer of the rocket. So if I could have found somebody better, then we would have maybe had less than 3 failures.
What motivations do people need to harness to try to make change, as opposed to just reading about change? And that's not supposed to be an easy question. I don't think it's this.
Well, like I said, I think if you study engineering and you figure out how to design new things, then it's relatively easy to start a company. You just need to get a few like-minded people with you, and then focus on creating a compelling prototype as soon as possible. And then, there's a strong venture capital industry in this country that will give you funding to take things to the next level, and that's all there is to it. And you might, if you try it a few times, you may or may not succeed. But I think sometimes people fear starting a company too much. You have to say, really, what's the worst that could go wrong? You're not going to starve to death. You're not going to die of exposure. What's the worst that could go wrong?
How do you come with this idea, actually? Sometimes they're pushing the human limit. You are always pushing the human limit. Why?
Well, I think about what technology solution is necessary in order to achieve the particular goal, and then try to make as much progress in that direction. Being a multi-planet species and being out there among the stars is important for the long-term survival of humanity, and that's one reason, kind of like life insurance for life collectively, life as we know it. But then the part that I find personally most motivating is that it creates a sense of adventure, and it makes people excited about the future. If you consider 2 futures, one where we are forever confined to Earth until eventually something terrible happens, or another future where we are out there on many planets, maybe even going beyond the solar system, I think that second version is incredibly exciting and inspiring, and there need to be reasons to get up in the morning. Life can't just be about solving problems. Otherwise, what's the point? There's got to be things that people find inspiring and make life worth living. There's a friend of mine who's got a great saying about creating a company, which is trying to build a company and have it succeed is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. So, what tends to happen is it's sort of quite exciting for the first several months of starting a company, and then reality sets in. Things don't go as well as planned. Customers aren't signing up. The technology or the product isn't working as well as you thought. And then that can sometimes be compounded by a recession, and it can be very, very painful for several years. So I think, frankly, starting a company, I would advise people to have a high pain tolerance.
When did it occur to you that Zip2 might be a success?
Well, I mean, when we first started out, I think our ambitions were really quite low. It was really to make enough money to pay the rent.
Yeah, we got a VC give us money. That was, yay!
Yeah.
We thought it was all over then.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I mean, when we started out in '95, we literally, at the beginning, we had one computer, which would be the web server during the day, and then at night, I'd program on it. And
we'd sleep in the office.
Yeah,
we couldn't afford to have an apartment.
It was cheaper to rent the office than to rent an apartment, so we just rented the office and slept in the office and showered at the YMCA.
Showered at the YMCA. And for me, the worst part was eating at Jack in the Box 3 times a day.
Yeah, man, this like
I'll sleep
it's
in
really
the
difficult to get food at Palo Alto after like 10 p.m. It's like Jack in the Box and a few other options. So we rotated through the Jack in the Box menu. Through the end of '95, that's essentially we're just sleeping in the office and showering at the YMCA, and then around the end of '95 is when Netscape went public, and then whether or not somebody knew what the internet was, they knew that you could make money on the internet somehow, or even if it's only on the greater fool theory. So when we went and talked to venture capitalists in early '96, there was a much greater interest in what we were doing. In fact, the round closed in like maybe a week or something.
It was crazy. Yeah, we went from sleeping in the office to people throwing, I mean, again, this is a financial crowd, so you guys see these numbers every day, but for us to hear, we'll give you $3 million.
Yeah, it sounded extremely, we thought they were crazy. Like, why would they do that?
It was literally like, these people are insane.
They obviously do not realize we're sleeping in the office.
In fact, when they did fund us, they realized that we were illegal immigrants.
Well, I mean,
yes, we were.
I'd say it was a gray area.
Yeah, yes, we were. We were illegal immigrants. We were sleeping in the office. We didn't have a car. We had one car, but the wheel kept falling off.
But, well, actually, yeah, the wheel did actually fall off the car.
Oh, yes, exactly. And the venture capitalists actually bought us cars.
Yeah, well, they gave us 40 grand.
It was 40 grand to go buy cars, which was, at the time was more money than we've ever seen.
Yeah.
You need a team around you to deliver a lot of idea. How do you choose your team? Based on what?
Well, I suppose honestly that it tends to be gut feel more than anything else. So when I interview somebody, my interview question is always the same. It's
what do you ask?
I said, tell me the story of your life. And the decisions that you made along the way and why you made them. And then, and also tell me about some of the most difficult problems you worked on and how you solved them. And that question, I think, is very important because the people that really solved the problem, they know exactly how they solved it. They know the little details. And the people that pretended to solve the problem, they can maybe go one level and then they get stuck.
The president's first space policy directive to me was go to the moon, and the word in there is sustainably.
Reusability is fundamental. If you, a fully reusable vehicle will cost 100 times less per flight than an expendable vehicle. And it kind of makes sense. If you think of any other mode of transport, it could be like jet aircraft or cars, bicycles, horses, every other mode of transport, boats, they're all reusable. The weird one that isn't reusable is space.
That's right.
So you can imagine how expensive it would be if every time you flew in a jet that you had to get a new jet,
right.
As opposed to refuel the jet. It would be insanely expensive to fly a jet if it was single use.
There wouldn't be anybody flying.
No, exactly. It would be like a few research flights at extreme expense, and that's all the flying that would occur. I actually don't care at all about money at all, but I do care about us becoming a spacefaring civilization.
Yeah.
And I do know that if we don't achieve full and rapid reusability, it will not happen.
Yeah.
And so that's the only reason I actually want money at all. What I really want to see is permanent base on the moon, permanently occupied human base on the moon, and us building a city on Mars. That's like, if I can see the beginning of that before I die, I'll die happy. In creating these companies that we thought that we would be successful, I thought that the most likely outcome was failure. But it was still worth doing, even though the odds of success were low. In fact, even for SpaceX, originally what I started doing was not creating a rocket company, but actually was going to do a small mission to Mars, which was just a philanthropic mission where you would send a small greenhouse with seeds and dehydrated gel, and it would, upon landing, hydrate the gel, and you'd have this cool picture of green plants on a red background. And the public tends to respond to precedents and superlatives. So this would be the first life on Mars, the furthest that life's ever traveled. And you'd have this great money shot of green plants on a red background. So, yeah, I thought that would get people's attention. So, but the expectation for that was no return. So I thought we wouldn't get any, we'd just spend the money on that and it wouldn't happen.
You wanted to do some things that were of benefit to humanity. Why did you think that? Well, because not everyone does.
Yeah, no, I guess it was, I had sort of an existential crisis of like, what does it all mean, and what's the meaning of life, and
was this 3 a.m. over a beer, or this was more serious?
Probably goes back to high school, I guess. I don't want to give a laboriously long answer, but I was, I had sort of a dark childhood. It wasn't good. Probably partially brought on by reading some of the philosophers. Like, don't ever read Schopenhauer and Nietzsche if you're 14. It's not good.
Yeah, or Ayn Rand either. Too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just trying to figure out what does it all mean. And actually, when I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I think is a great work of philosophy, that sort of highlighted the point that very often the issue is understanding what questions to ask. And if you can properly frame the question, then the answer is the easy part. So I thought things that expand the scope and scale of the human consciousness and allow us to better ask questions and achieve greater enlightenment, those are good things. And so that's sort of what can we do that's going to most likely lead to that outcome.
Back in '95, there weren't very many people on the internet. And certainly nobody was making any money at all. Most people thought the internet was going to be a fad.
A year ago, Musk sold his software company, Zip2, which enabled newspapers to publish online for $400 million cash.
Receiving cash is cash. I mean, those are just a large number of Ben Franklins.
So this is an ATM. What we're going to do is transform the traditional banking industry.
I do not fit the picture of a banker.
X.com, this is Julie.
Raising $50 million is a matter of making a series of phone calls, and the money is there. I've sunk the great majority of my net worth into X.com, which is the new banking and mutual funds company on the internet that I've started.
Big X.
Exactly. X.com.
I think X.com could absolutely be a multi-billion-dollar bonanza, because if you look at the industry that X is pursuing, it's the biggest sector of the world economy.
I mean, what you've got going on with the internet is it's basically like an earthquake where the epicenter is Silicon Valley, and it's shaking up the whole world.
Elon, you've been compared to Henry Ford, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs. Who do you compare yourself to?
I don't really compare myself to anyone. I mean, it's not. There's certain people that I admire from history that I think are great. Certainly many of the scientists and engineers and literary figures and so forth. I'm a big fan of Ben Franklin, who's a scientist and sort of thinker, and he was the kind of guy who did what needed to be done, So guys like that, I wouldn't say I compare myself in any way, but I certainly admire them.